These peasants have traveled to Bogota to demonstrate outside the Assembly building. Their numbers swelled in anticipation. It is here that Colombia's new constitution has been drawn up. And the peasants, calling for land reform, believe that at long last their demands are being heard. Today, Colombians are tired of being in the crossfire of a war between the guerrilla movements, the army, and extreme right death squads. 6,000 people have been killed over the past 5 years. On top of this, Colombia has been held hostage by the drug barons, sending the country into a horrific spiral of terror. But out of crisis came change. Forced by popular pressure to concede political reform, the government called for the election of a special constitutional assembly. Guaranteed funding and media exposure allowed new groups to participate. For the first time, Colombia's poor and minority groups were given a direct voice.
Espero que bajemos un grupo de constituyentes y escuchemos las solicitudes de los campesinos.
The result of a decade of effort by a few politicians and pressure groups with foresight, the Assembly's sole purpose was to write a new constitution. Totally independent of government and Congress, it was given full powers to make whatever changes it deemed necessary. The Democratic Alliance, led by the former guerrilla group M19, is the largest bloc, headed by Antonio Navarro. M19 has managed to muscle its way into mainstream politics despite the fear and loathing of the establishment.
Obviamente hay gente a la que no le gustamos, nos considera un peligro para las instituciones legalmente constituidas, para todos, es decir, la tradición de este país nos considera un peligro y quiere matarnos.
It was M19 that in 1985 seized the Palace of Justice in Bogota. The army's counterattack resulted in the deaths of more than 100 of Colombia's top lawyers and judges, decimating the country's legal system and stirring up hatred of M19. It's hard to believe that today, Navarro is one of 3 presidents of the Assembly, along with the liberal Horacio Serpa and the ultra-right Álvaro Gómez. Kidnapped by M19 only 2 years ago, Gómez has joined forces with Navarro in a cynical alliance.
En búsqueda de la paz todavía no está firmada. Es un nuevo paso.
Navarro was one of M19's chief ideologues, espousing populism and nationalism rather than communism. He was nearly killed in an attack by the extreme right in 1985, and today walks with an artificial leg and suffers from a speech impediment. But by 1989, M19 was militarily weakened and signed a truce with the government.
La dejación de las armas.
Por Colombia, por la paz, dejad armas.
M19's guerrillas laid down their arms, and the movement was transformed into a political party almost overnight. Since then, 4 other guerrilla groups have followed M19, participating in the Constitutional Assembly. When M19's leader, Carlos Pizarro, was assassinated, Navarro took over and his rise has been meteoric. M19 became Colombia's 3rd largest political force, and Navarro was appointed health minister. He resigned to lead M19's alliance in the Constitutional Assembly. As support for Navarro increases, so do threats on his life from those who fear his growing power. Today, he is consolidating his party.
¿Qué tenemos que hacer para que con una fecha política de corto plazo al frente seamos capaces de ser una alternativa real a los partidos tradicionales de este país, que han tenido en sus manos el Estado durante todos estos años y que lo han usado y han abusado de él? Es un reto muy difícil.
Here in the Cauca province, 12 hours drive south of Bogota, Navarro's guerrillas are dealing with the harsh reality of demobilization. These people are amongst the lucky few who have managed to construct a new way of life. They live on an M19 farm, but it only supports about 20 families. Despite government aid, only 10% of 1,200 former guerrillas have been reintegrated into society. The fear is that some could return to violence.
El salir de la guerrilla, de pronto la vida civil, pues para nosotros siempre eso algo fue duro, ¿cierto? Porque pues pensando siempre algo temeroso, porque salir de la clandestinidad a la ciudad, el gobierno lo conozca a uno, ¿cierto? Siempre eso es, hay temor por esas vainas de que pues qué tantas cosas pudieran pasar, así como se han desaparecido muchos compañeros.
Much larger than M19, with 10,000 guerrillas, the FARC and its communist allies are still fighting a bitter war against the army. They have lost popular credibility, but their military strength is such that they hold the key to peace. But on the very day elections to the Constitutional Assembly were held last December, the army bombarded FARC's headquarters, blowing away any chance of their participation in the debate. Since then, FARC and its allies have done £200 million worth of damage. A month ago in Venezuela, these guerrillas and the Colombian government finally sat down to negotiate. It was a last-ditch attempt, just weeks before the Assembly delivered the new Constitution. The sticking point was reform of the armed forces. Alfonso Cano is one of FARC's leaders.
Uno de los grandes problemas colombianos es el problema de los militares, del papel de las Fuerzas Armadas en la vida política y social del país. En Colombia eso se ha incrementado enormemente y como manejan la concepción de seguridad nacional, que es agresiva contra el pueblo, pues se ha convertido en el principal obstáculo del desarrollo de la democracia en Colombia. Nosotros decimos, si ese problema no se soluciona, los otros no se van a solucionar. Podemos hacer una constitución muy linda y muy democrática, pero siempre bajo la amenaza y la espada de Damocles de la intervención de las fuerzas militares en Colombia.
But the majority within the Assembly has been reluctant to tackle the army head-on. Weak governments have allowed the military to become overly powerful, and the Assembly knows that to challenge that power is to court danger. Only a few Assembly members dared to speak out.
Nuestro país tiene el primer puesto en la violación de los derechos humanos en el mundo. Que me muestren un solo condenado en la Asamblea Nacional Constituyente para creer que efectivamente la justicia penal militar ha hecho algo contra quienes están implicados. Desde la cúpula militar están implicados en los asesinatos de nuestros compañeros.
The new constitution will ban military trials for civilians, but in a vote which shocked many, M19's alliance rejected more wide-ranging reforms. Navarro's group was accused of compromising, grasping for power at any cost.
Sin embargo, pensamos que bien vale la pena el esfuerzo por estar en la constituyente. Hoy, cuando ya están terminando las sesiones, decimos todavía, hasta el último día, será importante que se conserve la posibilidad de que la coordinadora vaya.
In a final bold move, the Assembly used its extraordinary powers to dissolve Congress, prompting an early election. Some Assembly members resigned in protest, fearful that this new deadline could jeopardize the process for peace.
Yo creo que son unas minorías que no han podido acceder a este cuerpo y han roto el hilo institucional de Colombia al cerrar el Congreso, porque se les ha otorgado el curioso derecho de poder violar la Constitución.
Aquí no se ha venido a cerrar el Congreso para luego dar lugar a que se desate una violencia, sino, queridos amigos, para evitar que siga la violencia. Esta es la constituyente de la paz, esta es la constituyente de ponerle fin a la crisis profunda que nos está asediando.
Serpa has been a key figure in advocating the rejection of armed solutions in favor of stronger democracy.
Hay mucha falta de democracia y eso lo advierte el pueblo que quiere participar. Por eso se había venido luchando desde hace mucho rato por lograr esta circunstancia de la constituyente, que se logró de manera muy especial por la participación del liberalismo, que fue el que desde el gobierno y desde otras instancias de la vida política nacional dio lugar de manera fundamental al procedimiento de la Asamblea Nacional.
The strengthening of democracy also depends on reining in the power of the drug barons. The Colombian people desperately want freedom from drugs-related terrorism and are willing to negotiate for peace. At least 75% of Colombians are in favor of abolishing extradition, the only government weapon the drug barons ever feared. But the new constitution forbids it. In a secret ballot, the Assembly voted by an overwhelming majority against extradition.
No.
One of few to oppose this was Antonio Galán, brother of a leading politician murdered by the drug barons.
Eso en ocasiones produce algún dolor. El privilegio a los asesinos, el privilegio a quienes han efectuado un negocio ilícito como el narcotráfico, llenándolo de rebaja de penas, y la sangre de gente ilustre derramada, de gente humilde en atentados indiscriminados, en este momento quedando impunemente.
The Assembly had hardly finished voting when the dramatic news came through that Pablo Escobar had handed himself in, prompting accusations that the Assembly had given way to intimidation.
Pues obviamente de alguna manera también el narcotráfico ha hecho a su manera un lobby, ¿ve? Pero yo creo que eso no cambia ninguna de las decisiones que nosotros hemos tomado.
In his thrust to become an enduring political force, Navarro is already making compromises which could frustrate Colombia's expectations of change.
Es la única manera en este país de saber qué está pasando, de tener información, de poder vivir en Colombia, es conversando con todo el mundo. Y eso sí no lo negamos, conversamos hasta con el diablo.
The new constitution was presented here in an empty Congress. It has swept out the old establishment, and despite skirting round the issues of the drug barons and the army, it has reinforced democracy. But will this be enough for the guerrillas who have yet to sign a ceasefire?